Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm an amateur model builder. I'm building a layout in my basement inspired by the Frisco Railroad in the Ozarks. In this episode, I'm returning to my cement car and doing some weathering. In this episode, I'm picking back up my cement car project. I did the construction in my previous video, and you can find the link above. Now it's time for paint and weathering. So let's jump into it. I'm going to start by doing a little distressing of the grab irons. I'm using my tweezers and a small set of needle nose pliers. I need to find a balance between bending these wires, but not using so much force I pull them out of the model. After this is done, I clean the model with mild soapy water to remove any small particulates or oil from my fingers left behind in the construction process. Once dry, I airbrush the model with primer to provide a good base coat for the paint. I picked up a Lazy Susan from my local hobby store recently, and this makes the airbrushing process much faster. With the primer dry, I began some underpainting of rust on the roof and sides. I used the same technique I used on my mill's roof. I started with a brushed-on coat of dark rust from Vallejo. Next, I sponge painted with light rust. Then, I sponge painted with orange brown. To protect this underpainting, I then applied a matte varnish. This step is not needed with the salt chipping I did with the mill, but it will help with the chipping technique I'm using here. Once the varnish was dry, I roughly applied a coat of chipping medium from Vallejo. This chipping technique is a more subtle effect than the salt chipping technique. Once the chipping medium is dry, I then apply my base color. I debated on the base color. Historically, Frisco hoppers are gray, but this isn't a covered hopper. It is a converted boxcar. If Frisco had used these cars, which I can't find any evidence that they did, would they have started using the gray theme? I'm going to say that they would have saved some money and just continued to use boxcar red on these cars when they repurposed it. I used my boxcar mix of 1 part fire red to 2 parts Russian Air Force dark gray, both from Vallejo. Once the boxcar red is dry, I start on the chipping for the roof and sides. I apply water to the paint and then use a brush, toothpicks, dental proxy brush, or other method to remove the base color and reveal the rust underneath. This can take a little bit of practice. How much chipping medium is applied, how long the top coat is dried, how much water you used, how long the water sits on the paint, and how much force you use can all impact the final result. Well, I don't like this. It's a bit too muddy. I need to think about it for a bit before I can figure out how to make it better. While I'm thinking about this, I'll take some time to do the decals. But first, I'm going to apply a gloss coat to the model. The gloss coat will provide a flat, even surface for the decals to stick to and prevent silvering. I'm using Pledge Revive 4 polish for my gloss coat. For $10, I can get almost a quart of this stuff. That's pretty hard to beat. I thin it with isopropyl alcohol at a ratio of 1:1. After giving the gloss coat overnight to dry, I got out my tools for applying decals. I cut the decals out from the sheets with my decal scissors and set them aside. My process for applying decals is as follows. I place the decal in warm water for 15 to 20 seconds. While the decal is soaking, I add microset to the area of the model where it will be placed. I remove the decal from the water, and I slide it from the paper backing onto the model with a brush. And adjust it with a toothpick to its final position. I then dab up the excess water with a paper towel. Once I applied all the decals, I then apply microsol to help thin the film of the decals to make them conform better to the model surface. Once this is dry, I move on to the next area where I will be applying decals. Once they have all been applied, I add a light coat of matte varnish. Before moving on to other tasks, I want to take some time to deal with the roof. The chipping in the rust job I'm not too happy with. Like I said, it's a bit too muddy, but I'm not sure how to fix it. I spent a little time looking at some prototypes, and to be honest, finding pics of real boxcar roofs is kind of hard. Most photos are taken from the ground level. I can find plenty of pics of other models, but prototypes are hard to come by. I experimented by painting on some flat aluminum and some rust colors and washes to simulate the paint revealing the metal roofing underneath. This looked too busy and random to me. I found myself trying too hard to fix it. I needed to be done for the night. I knew I needed some metal roof showing through, and looking at prototypes, I found a tendency for heavily rusted centers and raw metal on the edges. I started by painting the top somewhat roughly with white gray. Then I sanded away some of this paint after letting it sit for several hours. This revealed the gray styrene underneath in some places, but I dealt with this by painting these patches dark rust. I then added light, medium, and dark rust washes. I wet the surface with water using a flat brush before applying the wash. I find this allows the wash to flow and helps to reduce hard lines around the edges of the wash. Finally, I applied a wash that was a mixture of dark gray and Russian Air Force dark green. Does it look fantastic? Not to me, but it looks close to what I want. I'll keep working with different techniques until I get what I want. I then moved on to weathering the body of the car. I started by simulating oxidized paint by dry brushing on a mix of boxcar red and the tiniest bit of white gray. Then I used a mix of wood, dark gray, and gray-white from Vallejo. I dry brushed this on in the direction of the grain of wood to simulate paint chipping off. I also applied this dry brushing to the roof walk and the corner platforms. Next, I applied a wash that was a mix of dark gray and black brown on the metal bracing and where other metal components come into contact with the wood of the boxcar. Now it was time to move on to some of the rest effects on the body of the car by using Vallejo rust pigments mixed with water, and I added them to the grab irons and the roof hatch, with a few bits and pieces on the other metal components as well. Then I applied Vallejo rust washes to some of these areas, along with streaks down the wood portion of the body of the car. For now, I wanted to seal this weathering in with a matte finish before moving on. I wanted to protect this work before moving to the underframe. The underframe won't be seen much, so I didn't put much effort into this work, except for the hoppers and slides. I started with a rough airbrushing of a mix of dark gray and Russian Air Force green. While I had it loaded in the airbrush, I also went ahead and did a control layer on the rest of the car. I added rust to the sides and hoppers with rust pigments. I sealed these with a matte coat. These pigments can be pretty easily damaged during handling. Finally, I did a wash of my murky mix of dark gray, Russian Air Force green, and black brown. Now for the weathering that will really distinguish this as a cement car. The cement. For this, I used Tamiya Weathermaster. I picked this up on a whim a while back in the hobby store, and I found limited use for them. They are similar to dry pigments, but they are a little tackier, almost like makeup. I used the snow pigment. I applied it primarily with a stiff brush to the tops around the hatches, down the sides near the hatches, and on the slides and hoppers. I then applied a matte coat to set them in. Unfortunately, the airbrush blew away more of the pigment than I anticipated, leaving this effect more subtle than I would have liked. Next time I'll probably apply some dry brushing and supplement it with the pigment for texture. While I had these pigments out, I also applied soot to the top and ends of the car. I moved on to weathering the trucks and wheels. After priming them, I airbrushed them with a mix of dark gray and a small amount of white gray to get the tone that I liked. I then dry brushed with dark rust, light rust, and orange brown. I used a very light hand with the orange brown. It's easy to use too much and make the rust look a little ham-handed. I then applied my murky wash. I lightly added all of these techniques to the couplers as well. For the inside of the wheels, I used Vallejo Brown Oxide Rust pigment, mixed with water. Finally, I removed the paint from the outside of the wheels using the back of an X-Acto knife. With the wheels done, my last bit of weathering for the whole model was a bit of dark earth from Vallejo. I lightly airbrushed a filter of this on the wheels to simulate dirt and dust being kicked up onto the car. One final coat of matte varnish and the model is ready for a final assembly. I'm using Katie magnetic couplers on my rolling stock, but I seem to have lost the screws for the couplers that were included with this kit. I've got some on order, and I'll put the couplers to the side while I wait for them. Finally, I attach the wheels, and she's ready for the layout, once I get the layout built. Thanks for joining me on this episode. You know, some projects really boost your confidence, and other projects remind you of all the skills that you need to learn. And this one was certainly the latter for me. This roof really gave me fits, but I'm confident that all the things that I learned on this weathering job will help me improve on my next weathering job. If you enjoyed this video, please click on the like button. This helps me know what kind of videos you want to see. And if you've got any questions or comments about my model making, please leave that in the comments below as well. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook and I've provided those links in the description, along with links to all the tools and supplies that I use in my model making. In the next episode, I'm going to be returning to my layout planning. I've actually done quite a bit of work in the last few months and have an update from my last video, episode 3, on the layout planning I did there. So join me next time as I continue building the White River Line.